Hi, it's Penny here, and I'm here to wrap up all the books that I read in the month of March. I think I read 17 books in March, but a few of those were short stories, so hopefully this won't take me too long. As usual, I am going to do this book battle style, which means I pair up all the books and I battle them against each other until we come up with the best book of the month. So firstly, let's start with some fantasy novels. We have Rise of Empire by Michael J. Sullivan, up against The Broken Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin, up against Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang. So let's start with The Rise of Empire. This is the second book in the Rhyria Revelations. To be honest, I'm currently reading the third book, and so it's hard to make my brain go back to what was happening in the second book. But high level, the series follows Royce and Hadrian, who are these thieves, and kind of their thieving jobs go wrong so that they end up being pulled into the bigger magic and politics of the world, where people have been trying to find the heir to this ancient kingdom with the idea that they need to be in charge again. But some people are less genuine about wanting to do that, and actually they just want a puppet on the throne. But it's all kind of building towards this more magical conflict. I'm really enjoying the adventure of the series, and I also really like the writing style. It's quite humorous and fun, even though there is also a darker edge to the series. And I think part of why I can't really put my finger on what happened in book 2 is because just this whole trilogy, I just feel like I'm going along on the adventure with these characters that I've grown to really love. I also have been listening to the audiobook, which is another case where sometimes it does mean things blur together a little bit more in your head, I think. But the audiobook narrator is really good, so that's probably also part of why I've been having a great time with these books. Then next in the battle, we have The Broken Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. Usually I like to hold up the book so that I don't have to edit in a picture. However, I also hate that my local library always has these like rental stickers on the front. Like, ugh. So, sorry editing me, you'll have to put in a picture. I'm sure you can manage. Anyway, The Broken Kingdoms is the second book in N.K. Jemisin's The Inheritance trilogy, which is set in this world where there were 3 gods, but then one of them killed another one and then gave the third one as a slave to these humans. And that's kind of the situation at the beginning of the first book. The events of the first book did mean, though, that the second book is in a very different place, but we're still kind of dealing with these human-god interactions. In fact, I suspect every book in this trilogy, I haven't read the third one yet, but I suspect every book in this trilogy has some level of like a romance between gods and humans. I really didn't like the romance in the first book, but the second book I think did it a little bit better, and as well just I think did a lot more with the way the whole magic and gods in this world were working. So it took me a little while to get into the second book, and I can't tell you anything about what it's about because it would be spoilers. No, what I can tell you is that we're following this blind woman who has a relationship with a godling, which is one of the children of the original 3 gods of this world. And then another one of these godlings turns up dead, so there's like a bit of a murder mystery going on, and this blind woman is kind of trying to navigate what's going on in the world. And there's a lot of like misinformation, or just like the general population doesn't really know about what went on with the gods in the first book. So I really enjoyed the second book. As I said, it took me a little while to get into it, but by the end of it, I thought it did some really clever things, and I was impressed how well it came together. I do think at times N.K. Jemisin's writing can be a little bit confusing, but it wasn't too bad in this one. Then the third book in this battle is Blood Over Brighthaven. So this is the second book I've read by M.L. Wang. Both of the books I've read have been very hyped. However, I really disliked Sword of Kaigan. That's not really true. The Sword of Kaigan, I really liked the first half, and then I was disappointed that a lot of the setup kind of just got thrown away and was left unexplored because of the events halfway through the book. If you've read it, you'll know. And I think a lot of people like the emotional content that comes after that first half of the book, but I just felt kind of betrayed because I didn't get what was set up in the beginning. And that's what I was interested in. Anyway, that's a whole different book from what we're talking about. What we're talking about is Blood Over Brighthaven. But I bring up the Sword of Kaigan because I just want to stress that I feel like Blood Over Brighthaven is like levels above the Sword of Kaigan in terms of writing quality. The characters felt so much more well developed. The world felt a lot more real. And the themes that it set up to explore were then actually explored, so I appreciated that. So basically we're following this young woman and she's going to test to join this magic school type situation. But mostly women are not allowed to do this test, and only once every decade they kind of let a woman do the test so that they can be like, see, she was no good, that's why we don't let women in. But this girl is very talented, and so she passes the test, and then is very disappointed to discover that sexism is still in the way and they're still not accepting her. But then also through the book, she kind of has to realize that even though there's a lot of prejudice against her, there are other people in society who perhaps have it even worse. And she really has to face up to a lot of the problems in her society that she's previously kind of been too privileged to see. So the way that this book explores the themes of privilege and societal oppression and things around that, I love the way that was done. So I love the way the themes were explored in this. As well, the magic is quite cool. It's very scientific and presented in a very academic way, but also they basically use these typewriters to draw energy, and then they use this kind of coding to give that energy instructions about what it should do. So I love the magic, I love the characters, I love the themes. It was a really satisfying read. I had a great time. So if we are putting these 3 books up against each other, I'm going to pick Blood Over Brighthaven because I just think it did everything it was trying to do so well. Okay, then we have a sci-fi battle. So we have Provenance by Ann Leckie up against Migration by Steph Matuku, up against All You Need Is Kill by Hiroshi Sakurazaka. So starting with Provenance, I actually got this copy from a little free library, and it's like an uncorrected proof, which then led me to buy the trilogy that kind of comes before this. So this is like a spin-off of the Ancillary trilogy, or I think it's called the Imperial Raj trilogy, where we're kind of following this AI spaceship that inhabits the bodies of multiple people, but then something happens where they end up only being in one body, and they then are off to try and get justice and revenge for whatever happened there. I really love that trilogy. So Provenance is kind of set in the world after that has happened, and you can see the impacts of that trilogy on this world, but it's kind of like a very side minor thing. What this book did have in common is some of the exploration of gender, although this one did a little bit less with that, but also that doesn't really play a big part in this book. So in this book, mainly we're following this young woman who has been adopted, and she's always known from when she was young that her and her brother were gonna kind of have to battle it out to inherit from their adoptive mother, and it was going to be whoever performed the best who would get the position. And she doesn't think that she's going to get it, and she's decided to do this drastic scheme to try and win her mother's approval, where she's gone to break this criminal out of, they call it compassionate removal. It's basically like a prison where instead of sentencing people to die, they just send them to this place, and they're like, you can do whatever you want, but you have to do it over there. So she breaks this guy out of compassionate removal and brings him back with this idea that he will be able to help her find these historical vestiges that were stolen. So again, on this planet, they're very obsessed with historical artifacts, and that plays a really big part in this. But it kind of turns into this political murder mystery. There's quite a lot of complexity to it, although I wouldn't say it was anywhere near as challenging to read as the original trilogy. The original trilogy, you really need your brain on board to understand the culture and everything that's going on. So this wasn't as complex as the original trilogy, but what I think this did do that the original trilogy didn't do as much is this was a lot more relatable, because we just mainly have this young girl trying to find her place and prove herself while suffering from a fair amount of anxiety along the way. So it wasn't really the continuation I was expecting from this trilogy. It really was a spin-off, but I still quite liked it. Then we have Migration by Steph Matuku. So she is a New Zealand author. She normally writes for children or young adults, which isn't me at all. However, I've always enjoyed everything I've read by her before, so I wanted to pick up this YA dystopian. We're mainly following this young kind of noble or upper class girl who's decided, instead of following her family's business interests, she wants to go and join like the military. Because as well, she is what's called an intuitive. In this military school, they basically perform in pairs where they have an intuitive and a combatant. And the intuitives are able to like see the future by several seconds and can use that to like telepathically send that advice or that information to their combatant partner. I really liked the creativity in this. The military school kind of starts out very YA dystopian, like a little bit like Divergent, where they've got all these different tournament battles that they're doing against other students. But the way that the tournaments were set up were very creative. Like every single one was kind of a different kind of battle. And then there's kind of like a bigger conflict, which kind of throws the whole military school into an actual war type situation. And the story starts linking in a lot more to kind of like events that happened in the past and kind of the religion that they follow that is also linked into what happens in the past that we learn a little bit about in the prologue. And the final kind of resolution is something that I thought was a really unique idea. I was just kind of disappointed that it didn't explore that idea further. Like, I think this was really great, but I think it had the potential to do even more with a lot of the ideas that it introduced. So I loved it, but I was also disappointed that it wasn't like more, because I think it could have been more. Then we have All You Need Is Kill, and this is kind of like a novella that is the source material for the movie The Edge of Tomorrow, which I really liked. And also this was a reread for me, but I did watch the movie first, I think. So in this, basically these aliens have attacked and humanity is trying to fight back but doing pretty badly, except for this like one woman who is an amazing fighter. We kind of eventually get an idea of why she might be so great when our main character, this like young Japanese military guy, gets stuck in a time loop and starts just reliving the day before this first battle that he ever was in, and kind of through just reliving this loop over and over has to figure out how they can possibly win the battle and potentially eventually win the war. And I did actually, since I reread this, rewatch the movie, and they're very different in a lot of ways. Like sort of a similar setup, but also like not really. And a lot of the explanation about how the time loop is working and what's going on with the aliens, like again, similar, but not really. And I do think maybe I like the book explanation better. Maybe it's just that it's easier to explain things like that in a book. What I didn't like about the book that I somehow didn't pick up on at all in my first read is that in the very beginning, there's a lot of like male gaze descriptions of women, in that most women seem to be described by their breasts, and just, I don't know how I missed it the first time. I guess I was less sensitive to that kind of thing, or less aware, which is interesting. Anyway, if that's something you're sensitive about, be warned. There's some of that in the beginning of the book. It does kind of peter out when we get to getting some of the woman's perspective and just kind of the second half of the book. But it's written in a way that's a lot of fun and like quite high action. And even though like it's a time loop story, so you're kind of just living the same day over and over again, it's written in a way where it doesn't feel too time loopy, like it doesn't feel too repetitive, which is something I liked about the movie as well. So I guess there are some similarities there. I guess as well I would say this is another one where it's quite short, and I almost wish it had been a little bit longer, but probably it did manage to do everything it needed to. Like, I wish that this was longer more than I wish that All You Need Is Kill was longer. So if I'm putting these three books up against each other, firstly, let's take away All You Need Is Kill just for those male gaze descriptions. And also, I just don't think it did as much as the other two. Then it's actually kind of hard for the other two. Both of them had some really great creativity and original ideas. Maybe I have to pick Provenance. I think I have to pick Provenance because, I don't know actually. Migration just had some really cool ideas, but it didn't quite deliver on them. Whereas I think Provenance did what it was trying to do. And like I would recommend Provenance to more people. But like if you like YA dystopian, maybe give Migration a go. But actually, I think I'm going to pick Provenance. I think everything was a little bit better developed in Provenance. We had some pretty cool characters, like relatable characters. We had a really cool world being developed, and like that whole political murder mystery was cool as well. Okay, I've been filming forever already, so hopefully I can cut that down. From here on out, it's a lot of shorter things, so let's hope we can go faster. So our next battle is kind of more contemporary real-world stories. We have Oe by Becky Manawatu up against The Grownup by Gillian Flynn, up against Horror Stories by Liz Phair. So firstly, Oe. This is a New Zealand contemporary tragedy, I guess. I saw it was getting a lot of really great reviews and people were comparing it to Once Were Warriors, which is like a New Zealand classic, so I thought I would try it. To be honest, I didn't really like the writing style, and also like I don't read a lot of contemporaries, especially tragedies. They don't bring me any joy to read. It is probably like good to get the like a different perspective of life, but like I kind of know people are out there living awful lives. I don't necessarily need to read about it to have more empathy. So basically we're following this young boy and his parents have died. His older brother has dropped him off at his auntie's house and then he's just living with his grief. We're also kind of following the older brother as he's feeling a lot of guilt about having left his younger brother behind, but also he's just a young man trying to find his place and making a lot of bad decisions while he's at it. And then also we're kind of getting their parents' perspective back in time when they were younger and learning about a lot of bad decisions that happened then. And there are some twists and turns, I guess, along the way. I didn't really like that it made the tragedy into a mystery. And I also particularly didn't like that the dog dies. So in the end, I gave this 2.5 stars. Like, I do think I got some perspective from it, but also I did not have a good time reading it. I didn't like the writing. I didn't like that the dog died. Then I read The Grownup by Gillian Flynn. So this is just a super short little story. I think it's like 80 pages? No, 67 pages. You know, they've padded it out with a little sample of Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. And like, it's also quite wide line spacing and big font. So really this is a short story, but they managed to put it into a book. Like they stretched it out to be long enough to make it a book. So we're following this con artist woman. She decides that maybe she could make some money by like doing spiritual cleansings of rich women's houses. But when this woman takes her to their house, it's like this horrible haunted house and it really does have very awful vibes. And there's also something weird going on with the children in the family. Honestly, I feel like I should have seen the twist coming, but I didn't see it coming. But it was very satisfying the way it came together in the end. And also, I think, fairly thrilling as well. Although the ending is also a little bit open-ended. So if you don't like open-ended stories, then you might be quite annoyed by this. But I had a good time with it. I'm glad that I read it, even though it was very short. Then we have Horror Stories by Liz Phair. So Liz Phair is a musician, I think, kind of from the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s maybe. I listened to her a lot in my late teens, early 20s. And so this is kind of her memoir. To be honest, it's written more like just little personal essays, kind of giving little reminiscences of things that have happened to her, but maybe linking them into broader topics. I liked the chapters that leaned more into being more like essays. The ones that were more her talking about her very privileged white woman problems were less enjoyable for me, especially the one where she talks about how she had an affair. And honestly, I don't know, she kind of owns up to it, but also makes a lot of excuses for herself. And it just kind of made me lose respect for her as a person. And this is why I usually don't read memoirs, and I need to remember not to read them because I just don't really enjoy them. I didn't really get anything out of this. Like, I think some of her stories were kind of relatable, I guess, also as a fairly privileged white woman, but I didn't really get anything particularly special or meaningful out of it. So that was kind of disappointing. So if I'm putting these three books up against each other, obviously two of them were disappointing, so we'll take those away and we will be putting The Grownup through to the next round. Okay then, in the interest of this not being incredibly long, I'm going to try and put 5 short stories into the next battle. So firstly we have Locke, Lamora and the Bottled Serpent by Scott Lynch, up against a couple of Locke Tomb short stories by Tamsyn Muir, up against a couple of short stories by John Wiswell. So firstly, Locke, Lamora and the Bottled Serpent. So this is just a little short story. It was published in 2 parts in the Grimdark magazine, and I would say you don't need to read this short story for like completion in the world. If you've been particularly missing Locke Lamora, it's a nice little step back into that world, and it did make me want to go back and read the first 3 books in the Locke Lamora series. But I'm still annoyed that book 4 hasn't come out yet, and I'm not going to reread those 3, I don't think, until book 4 comes out. Like, a short story is not enough when we've been waiting like 10 years for book 4. So I enjoyed the short story. It's basically a story of Locke's youth as he is training to become a con artist, and he's spending a short period of time working at this bar while some kind of hijinks go on around him. To be honest, Locke plays a fairly small part in this short story, even though he's there all the time, but he's more an observer of what's happening rather than an active participant. Okay, then we have As Yet Unsent and The Unwanted Guest by Tamsyn Muir. So As Yet Unsent goes between books 2 and 3 in the trilogy, and we're kind of following a side character that we did get to see in book 2, and it's kind of explaining what was happening with those side characters kind of near the end of book 2 and leading into book 3. It's written as a report by one of those characters that they're kind of writing in secret, and it kind of got me sneakily. In the beginning, I was just like, this kind of just a factual report type thing. I already kind of know the events based on what happened in book 3 because I'd already read that by this point. But then it got a little bit emotional and almost made me cry. So well done. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised at Tamsyn Muir getting emotions out of me at this point. Then The Unwanted Guest is the other short story I read in this world. This one is basically like a battle of the minds that's happening at the end of book 3, and it's kind of written almost like a play. It's very strange. I didn't know what was going on really for most of it, but also I loved it, which is pretty much a description of every book in the Whetū series. Like, you don't know what's going on, but it's great somehow. But I didn't think The Unwanted Guest was quite as good. But maybe if I read it a lot more times, I could get some more meaning out of it. I'm not sure. Then I read 2 short stories by John Wiswell. So I picked this up because I really liked Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. But these 2 short stories, firstly we have I'll Miss Myself. This is kind of a weird story where there's a social media app where you can talk to like other yous in other multiverses. And this particular guy seems to have a bunch of like mental health issues. And at some point, another one of him reaches out to him and is like, are you okay? Because it seems like a lot of the time, him and his other selves are just like spiraling over things and getting stuck emotionally on things. And the story, it's kind of weird. It almost doesn't go anywhere, but it's really just about learning to take care of your mental health and kind of this, I don't know, movement of self-care that is rippling through this social media of this particular guy's different versions of himself. It's weird. It didn't do much. It was very short, but I didn't mind it. But I did like DIY a lot more. So this is about this young boy. It's kind of a climate story because he has a lot of health issues because of the climate issues. And because of his struggles and just his financial situation, he applies to get into this magic school. But when he doesn't get the scholarship, he's not able to join. And then kind of has to go off and try and learn a little bit of magic himself. And he's always trying to work out how he could use magic to address the climate situation, which supposedly this bigger magic organization is also doing, but are they? Because they're not making any progress. I've really liked some of the themes in that story. I thought, again, very short story, but it got across what it was trying to say. So if I'm putting all 5 of these up against each other, firstly we'll take away The Unwanted Guest and I'll Miss Myself, because those were definitely the ones I liked less. From there it's hard because I think maybe as standalone short stories go, DIY maybe had the most to say, but if you like the series that the other 2 come from, then you will definitely want to read them, I think. Well, you don't need to read the Locke Lamora one, so let's take that away. So then I've got As Yet Unsent up against DIY. You know, As Yet Unsent made me cry. I think I'm going to pick As Yet Unsent, even though objectively I think DIY might be better. But this is the whole thing with the whole Whetū series. Like, objectively, I'm not sure it's a well-written series. And yet, it's a 5-star series for me. Anyway, As Yet Unsent, we'll put that through to the next round. Okay, then we are finally up to the last battle. So we have Witch Hat Atelier Volumes 4 and 5 up against The Cursed Princess Club Volume 1, up against Secret Spies by Steph Matuku. Okay, so Witch Hat Atelier Volumes 4 and 5, to be honest, it's been a little while since I read these, and this is not a series that I'm particularly loving. The plot doesn't really stick with me. It's about these cute little witch girls learning to do magic, learning some lessons along the way. There is kind of a bigger threat to their world, and that's the part I'm more interested in, and it's kind of, in these volumes, starting to get going, but every time it gets going, it pulls back, and I just am not sure. I'm feeling very unmotivated to continue this series. I can see why a lot of people love it. It is really cute. It does have some wholesome messages. I think some people will find these young girls' situations and emotional struggles very relatable, but I'm just bored. So I have also been rereading The Cursed Princess Club. So I've talked about this a lot. It was one of my most favorite books that I read last year. So we have the 3 pastel princesses who are betrothed to the 3 plaid princes, but the 3rd prince discovers that his fiancée, I guess, is not meeting the typical princess beauty standards, and he's quite upset about it. He calls her ugly. She overhears and runs out into the forest, where she runs into the Cursed Princess Club and kind of forms a friendship with those girls, and we learn all about them. And just, I've already finished the series previously on Webtoon, and now I'm rereading it via the books that are being published. And I just love this series. It's so funny, but also really clever and wholesome. And I don't know what it is, but I love this series. So I don't know. I've recommended it a million times at this point. Then as well, I read Secret Spies by Steph Matuku, so another book by Steph Matuku. This one is a children's book, so this is the 3rd book in a series where we're following Whetū, who's gone to live with this magician because her mother is going to be the magician's personal assistant because the magician is kind of a disaster and needs help. Then Whetū starts helping out with the animals that he owns, like the farm animals, and they're all kind of magical and also a lot of drama. In this particular one, they get some new sheep who have some like feminist issues with the ram on the farm. As well, there's another magician kind of maybe stealing the tricks of their magician, and it all comes together in quite a clever and fun way. As I said, this is a children's book, but I think it's just so clever. It has really great lessons. The book also has a bunch of pictures throughout it, which are really cute. It's just a really fun series. So if I'm putting these 3 up against each other, first let's take away Witch Hat Atelier, because as I said, I'm bored by it. But also, I think I'm going to go with Secret Spies just because I don't let rereads win the battle anyway, so Cursed Princess Club can't win. And I did really love Secret Spies, so I think we're going to put that forward instead. So, before we do the final book battle to work out the best book of the month, let's do a couple of semi-final battles. We'll do longer books and shorter books, basically. So firstly, we have Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wang up against Provenance by Ann Leckie. And I actually read these in the same reading vlog. So I'll link that around somewhere. At the time, I think I said that both these characters in some ways are somewhat similar in that they're both trying to prove themselves. Although our main character in Provenance is a lot less confident of her skills than Siona from Blood Over Brighthaven. So I did enjoy both of these, but I will say Blood Over Brighthaven was definitely the best in my mind. I think everything about it was just so cohesive and like it was great in every way in terms of characters, themes, world building. So we'll put that forward to the finals. Then for shorter things, we have The Grownup by Gillian Flynn up against As Yet Unsent by Tamsyn Muir, up against Secret Spies by Steph Matuku. So I feel like this battle is really difficult, but also I don't feel like any of these are going to be able to do very well against Blood Over Brighthaven. So does this battle even matter? I kind of want to avoid it. I'm trying to think of just one reason to take one of these away, and I can't. I think all of these were really great at doing what they wanted to do. Let's take away Secret Spies because it's a kid's book. That's a bad reason, but let's do it. Then I think I'm actually going to pick The Grownup. Is that what I was expecting? I don't think it was. But I think I'm going to pick the Grownup. I think a lot of people could get enjoyment out of that short story. Even though, actually, let me read you the first sentence so you could be prepared. I didn't stop giving hand jobs because I wasn't good at it. I stopped giving hand jobs because I was the best at it. Be prepared. So that means our final battle for Best Book of the Month is going to be Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wang up against The Grownup by Gillian Flynn. And I've already spoiled it. The winner is Blood Over Brighthaven. I love this book. I am so glad that I picked this up even though I didn't like Emma Wang's first book, because I almost didn't. And then I would have really missed out. So that is the Best Book of the Month. Let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books, because I would love to chat with you about them, or let me know what was the best book that you read in the month of March. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.